Well, today we're here to talk about USAID. What is the history of this program? Was it nefarious from the start, or was it co-opted?
Well, I think that we need to clarify a little about what USAID is and does.
Mm-hmm.
Because there have been different interpretations of the overall agency. First, you have this sort of lib do-gooder cut, where USAID is just there to make people's lives better, a kind of grown-up version of the Peace Corps, people going out and doing the sexy John le Carré civilian stuff, making the world a better place, yet somehow the world never improving that much. And that is a take. It's not entirely incorrect, but 40% accurate as always. The cynical corrective that you get from the left and the right is that this is just a CIA front operation, and you hit all of the high notes in your introduction, that it props up favorable governments, it provides a means of buying support internationally, it funnels money to favored actors. Donald Trump and Elon Musk constantly use the language of money laundering, that this funnels money to the chosen winners and the political clients of Washington, D.C., and specifically the most liberal segment of the American elite. Finally, there's a version which takes it back to Washington, back to the intra-American reality, and USAID, in this case, is just a jobs program or a means of funneling money to favored contractors, favored consultancies, favored NGOs, a kind of civilian version of the military-industrial complex, except instead of enriching Raytheon, it enriches DAI or whatever, the Open Society Initiative launched by George Soros, whatever particular group has the backing.
Like insert global DEI NGO here.
Precisely, exactly. We're going to clear the Donbass with, like J Street consultancies and the Human Rights Campaign, but somehow all of the money gets soaked up by DC-based consultants, and none of it. And the Donbass, tragically, is never truly queered. And all of these versions of contemporary USAID have some validity to them. Thinking about it more analytically, you can break it down to what USAID does. And mostly, it's a grant program. Different NGOs around the world pitch themselves as service providers around a set of priorities that come out of Washington. They look at the track record of the NGO. They look at all of the good meritocratic KPIs, its ability to deliver on previous projects, and they award a contract to, it might be Médecins Sans Frontières here, it might be the Red Crescent there, it might be a commercial operation like DAI based in the United States, depending on the particular project. The permanent staff of USAID, it's a lot of people who just review and revise grants, and then the people who actually perform the work are contractors that work below USAID for independent agencies, NGOs, consultancies, you name it. Some of this work is unproblematically good. For instance, a lot of disaster relief is channeled through USAID. The money goes through USAID, you pay some, Oxfam or another agency, and they show up in South Sudan with tents and food, or they show up in Myanmar more recently with relief supplies to help in the wake of the recent earthquake there, aid in kind to Haiti as well. So when there is this kind of emergency crisis, USAID is a mechanism to get help to people who need it. That part of it, you can quibble about how it's done, but it genuinely does save people's lives. There is a need after disasters or during famine to provide people with life-saving assistance, and this is a mechanism for the United States to do it. There's also the so-called development programs. This is much more checkered and much more mixed. There might be, because of some deal between the United States and a local government somewhere in the developing world, generally speaking, we're talking about developing world governments. Eastern Europe, post-communist Eastern Europe, is sort of the most developed region that still receives a significant amount of USAID money. And that's largely a legacy of post-communist transition, likely to be even without Trump's cuts, it was likely to have been phased out as countries like Poland or Hungary or Romania get more support from the EU and develop robust enough local economies not to really want to deal with the stigma and the bureaucratic supervision that comes with receiving grant money from USAID. And some of these projects can be useful. There are bridges, roads, durable, useful infrastructure that got created out of USAID projects. More often than not, they're of questionable value. A lot of the funding gets soaked up by consultancies and NGOs doing administration, doing research, preparing PowerPoints, even in cases where a large proportion of the funds allocated do flow down to people who actually will use them for ways in ways that improve lives on a mass scale. There's a large supervisory component to it, right? You always have people who need to, you're hiring some PMCs to manage the disbursement and the operation of these programs. They rarely have the simplicity of something like Medicare or Social Security, where there's a very clean-cut just delivery of support. It's things like this tend to get means tested to hell, all kinds of eligibility requirements, which provide another mechanism to sort out who will benefit and who doesn't. This time, rather than USAID deciding which NGO or civil society organization benefits, it's the civil society organization deciding who gets to benefit locally. So it can be a mechanism to reproduce client relationships further down the chain. But sometimes the projects, like to cite a couple that were famously interrupted by Elon Musk, are about giving pregnant women the medication that will keep their children from having AIDS after birth, right? Mm-hmm. And frankly, I don't know I don't know where like an efficiency argument should fall in preventing women from getting the drugs they need so that their babies aren't born with AIDS. It feels like, yeah, you can just spend money on that. That's fine, right? Maybe don't let the NGO get away with too much, inflating expenses too much. Maybe don't make it a cost plus contract. But yeah, sure, just do that, right? Like I would pretty much rubber stamp that particular grant proposal, right? Approved. And there are other types of support, things like mental support or emergency medical support for refugees. For instance, there were communities in Syria that were basically held together by USAID first, USAID grants to provide services, and then secondly, USAID was one of the major employers in that community. You know, people displaced by war, people whose economic livelihoods had been turned upside down by the conflict, by forced removal, and one of the few employers, one of the few paychecks that you could bring home to support not just yourself, but your entire family, would come from someone who spoke English well enough and could manage a PowerPoint well enough to get hired by a USAID affiliated NGO. You cut those, there's really no upside. There's no way to spin that as a win for local autonomy or national sovereignty or even cost effectiveness. You're just kicking an extremely vulnerable community in the teeth. Right, the last kind of support pillar gets eroded at that moment, and so we could put that all in the relative positive column.
Okay.
There are programs that, and especially like some areas where you can be a lot more critical of USAID, have to do with governance initiatives, where you're essentially hiring Western PMCs to work with local PMCs to make sure that the most pro-American segment of the educated political elite is hyper-empowered to politically contest for control of the state. This is how the Open Society initiatives launched by the Soros Foundation led to a spate of neoliberal pro-Washington governments all across Eastern Europe. Some were good, some were bad, some were absolutely disastrous, like Mikhail Saakashvili in Georgia, where whatever good he might have hypothetically accomplished at some point by being less corrupt or more technocratic than his rivals was immediately eroded by a pro-NATO obsession that got him into a losing war with Russia, a completely needless one provoked by Saakashvili himself. So in that case, you have these programs that fall pretty squarely into the narrative that's driven by the critics of USAID. They are empowering specific pro-American actors locally, and it's designed quite explicitly as a sort of to pave the way for a color revolution or regime change in a favorable direction. On the more corrupt end of the spectrum, it's a means of rewarding autocratic governments for going along with American policies. Throughout Africa and Latin America, for instance, during the heyday of American-led globalization and neoliberalism, if you played ball, you could get a whole bunch of USAID money to back whatever patronage project or corruption opportunity presented itself, and just funnel funds through that, which would end up in your Swiss bank account or in the hands of your political allies locally to buy support. That absolutely was part of the overall soft power strategy, not about winning hearts and minds through actual good works, but as a means of whitewashing, basically bribes and payouts to autocratic governments for following the Washington consensus or U.S. policy interests.